Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, answer your questions on Ayn Rand's philosophy, Objectivism. Whether you're trying to comprehend the eternity of the universe, or figure out what you should be doing with your life, if you're seeking the guidance of a comprehensive, rational worldview, simply go to charles2.com/contact and send me a question. And my last name is spelled T as in Tango, E as in Echo, and W as in Whiskey. I recently saw a news headline about illegal gambling, and it made me wonder what the objectivist position should be. Obviously, in the context of a free society, gambling would be fully legal in general, but could there be specific issues the government should regulate against? For example, if someone bets and loses a huge sum, say $1 million, and would lose everything if they paid, I assume this would not be a valid contract the government could enforce. So would the existence of these kinds of bad outcomes create a need to regulate? Or would it simply be that case law would effectively set the limits of which gambling debts could be collected or not? Well, first, let's get clear on regulation. No, I do not believe in any regulation of gambling or debt or anything. Regulation is not the same thing as a law respecting or protecting individual rights. When you talk about regulation, you are talking about something other than laws designed to protect individual rights. Just think about what does regulation mean? Well, I'm looking at my PC right now. Now, there are various components in the PC designed to regulate the temperature. Now, regulating the temperature is not necessary for the PC to exist in the first place. Just having the PC set up and functioning doesn't require any temperature regulation. Temperature regulation is a secondary thing meant to ensure the smooth and continued functioning of the PC. And the same is true here. There are laws that protect individual rights, laws against murder, against theft. Those are not regulations. Regulations are when you go from protecting people's ability to make their own decisions to making their decisions for them so that their lives and society in general and the economy runs more smoothly. Now, in the case of a PC, of course, regulation of temperature is totally valid, but we are human beings, not inanimate objects, not even non-rational organisms. We are reasoning beings. Regulation is totally inappropriate in our case. So, when the government regulates us, it's not just setting up the conditions required for us to interact with each other. It is telling us how to act specifically with each other so that our lives run smoothly. Again, as I said, it's not setting the conditions so that we can run our own lives. It is actually running our lives for us. So, regulation as a concept, it's valid as a concept in the sense that it refers to a specific kind of law, kind of government action, but I am against all regulation. That is how you should conceptualize regulation, and you should be against all regulation. So, no regulation of gambling or debts. So now the question, should there be a limit on gambling debts, such as if somebody loses more money than he can ever possibly repay? Well, yes and no. It depends on what you are limiting. I do not believe that the government, I don't believe there should be any such thing as the kind of bankruptcy laws that exist today, where they actually advertise it as, on the government website, they'll advertise it as, get a fresh start, everybody deserves a second chance. No. The government should not be able to force creditors to forgive debt. That is totally illegitimate. So in that case, in that sense, there should be no limitation on debt. I mean, outside of something silly. I mean, if you in some way get in debt for $50 trillion or something, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you would rule out just because it's an unreal sum of money. But even if it's something like $1 million and you make, $50,000 a year, even that I would say is legitimate. However, there should be a kind of limitation on debt. It is not a limitation of how much debt you can get into, but of how much can be collected in a given period of time. So the government should not be able to force a creditor to forgive debt, but it should also not allow a creditor to seize every last bit of a debtor's wealth and then garnish 100% of his wages so he starves to death. Now, the libertarian approach to this would probably, I say probably because I might be giving them a little too much credit, but a libertarian might say, well, it would be stupid for a creditor to do that. If you just took everything you could from somebody so that he starved to death, well, then he won't be able to pay you back. So it might be stupid, but hey, if somebody's in debt, the creditor is owed, or maybe not even the creditor, but the, I don't know what terminology is applicable when you're talking about gambling, but whatever, the person to whom the money is owed. It might be stupid for him to demand all of your wealth right now, but you do owe him the money, so if he does want to seize everything and have you starve to death, that's his right because you owe him the money. That is totally illegitimate. And that is obviously effectively giving, I'm just going to use creditor for simplicity's sake, that is obviously giving the creditor the power to enforce a death sentence on someone, and they cannot have that. So yes, you would just take for granted that certain kind of contracts are invalid. I've answered this question a long time ago about, can you put into a contract a clause where if somebody doesn't live up to it, you can kill them. Well, no, you can't do that. You can't circumvent the government in that way. And the same thing here. When you form a contract of this kind, you would just do so on the understanding that, okay, this person will owe me, and I can't be stripped of my right to the money this person owes me, but I can't collect it in a way that will mean the death of this person. And how much money will be legitimate would have to be decided by a judge in the particulars of the case. How much income is required to live, and how much income this guy is making, and so what can he afford to pay? That would have to be decided based on the particulars of any given case. But yes, when you get into situations like that, the proper thing is to get into them on the understanding that there is a limit to how much you can collect how quickly. Although there shouldn't be a limit to the absolute debt someone can incur outside of, as I said, the 100 trillion million zillion dollars. Do preferences come from our values? If yes, does this apply to our sexual preference, and does that make it a choice? If it does not apply to our sexual preference, why not? It seems that most people take it as self-evident that sexual preference is not a choice. Well, I think most people do take it as self-evident that sexual preference is not a choice. And I think that's because it is self-evident that sexual preference is not a choice. It's something that's always amazed me. Now, I'm no fan of homosexuality. I'm not even necessarily for gay marriage. But the idea that being gay is a choice, in the way, at least in the way people mean it, is just, it's shocking how rationalistic some people can be. It would, all it takes is for you to introspect for 2 seconds and to think, well, what if I, as a straight man, wanted to enjoy having sex with men? Would I be able to choose to do that? And the answer is obviously no. So it is self-evident that sexual preference is not a choice. At least not as an adult when you're conscious of the choice you're making. It might result from choices you make as a kid without knowing exactly what you're doing, but you don't choose to be gay directly. Now, do preferences come from our values? Well, what is a preference? Well, the definition I'm going to take here is that a preference is what would objectively be worth, which of several options would be worth pursuing. So if something is a preference, this is the option that will be worth it over these other options. Now, I don't mean preference as a psychologically motivating desire, and people equivocate on this all the time. So it's okay. I have a piece. This is my favorite example, right? My favorite cliche example. I have a piece of cake in front of me. I can also be on a diet. Well, which do I prefer? Eating the cake or being healthy and sticking to my diet? Well, this is kind of the issue of motivation versus selfishness. Is every motivated action necessarily selfish? So is it whichever I do is the one I preferred? Is that what preference means? Does preference mean whatever desire you've actually chosen to make psychologically motivating? Or does preference mean which one of those would actually make you happier overall in the long run? Now, that second view is what I'm defining as preference for the purposes of answering this question. That's how I'm defining preference. So, do preferences come from our values? Well, some do, some don't. So, cilantro. Some people are simply built physically such that they dislike the taste of cilantro. I think it tastes like soap or something. I can't remember which kind of person I am, but some people like cilantro, some people don't. There's a specific gene for it or something. And that is a preference, but it doesn't come from your values in the sense of something you have chosen to pursue. That's just built into you, innate. Do you like this taste? Would you prefer cilantro on your food? There's no value involved there. That's just built in. However, you could take another situation. You are at home one night, and what do you prefer? To play World of Warcraft or have sex with your wife? Well, that will be impacted by your values. Let's say that you have chosen to pursue a career you love. And so you feel like you have a life worth celebrating. Well, that will impact your preference. You will prefer having sex that night, celebrating your life, over playing a game. And I have nothing against video games, obviously. But your values will impact your preferences in that case. Now, let's say you made the opposite decision. You didn't pursue a career you loved. Instead, you decided that you couldn't do it or you weren't willing to try, and so you've taken a career you hated just to get by. You didn't want to take any risks, and so you don't have anything to celebrate. Well, in that case, you might actually prefer playing your game instead of having sex, because, having sex won't feel as good. It might even feel bad in a way if it's not meaningful, if you don't have anything to celebrate. And so in that, specifying that context, within that context, your preference will actually be different based on your values. So, yeah, I mean, some preferences do, some don't. You can't rationalistically deduce from this, which is what you're trying to do, well, therefore, didn't gay people choose to be gay? You can't, you can't infer that from the premises you're trying to get me to endorse. So how does this relate to sexual preference, though? Is this something built in, or does this come from values? Well, I think this might be a case like any emotion, where it depends on, you have an input, so it depends on your values, but it depends on you having values at all. For instance, anger. If you get angry, it's because you have identified something as an injustice. There's no getting around that. You can't make yourself get angry at the fact that things are going well, or that you're seeing justice is served. You can't make yourself get angry at that. I mean, you could in a kind of twisted way, but that's a complicated thing. The point is, anger as an emotional response, the reason, what triggers our feeling of anger is innate, but the concretes that we identify as instances of injustice depend on our own judgment. And further, our ability to feel anger at all depends on our ability to see anything as an injustice, which depends on our choosing to pursue values at all. If you don't choose to pursue anything, right? If you are depressed, you've given up, you don't care about values, and then you won't get angry when you see an injustice, because you're not pursuing values at all, so it doesn't mean anything to you. So it's not that you have all of these choices of what could make you angry, but you do have the choice of whether you're going to be the kind of person who can even be angry. So I think sexual preference may work like that. It may be that the abstract ideas that turn you on, very abstract, are innate, but what specifics you categorize under that abstraction, you identify as falling under that abstraction, depend on your own thinking and interpretation, and whether you find anything sexually attractive at all depends on your pursuing values in the first place. Because if you don't, you won't even actualize your capacity for sexual attraction. If you want to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you want to make it possible for me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.